On Wednesday of this week, I met with both the Coates and Vance families for a little pre-baptismal counseling. It's actually the practice of Father Sandy and I to do that for every baptism, to meet with them for a few days beforehand. Truth be told, for clergy, it's somewhat to make sure you still want to go through with this. No last-minute jitters. It's also a time for Sandy or I to sit down with the parents and ask why they've arrived at this morning, to have the families to get a chance to meet each other and get to know each other. It's a chance for us to answer some of their questions. Virtually every time I've had one of these Wednesday night meetings with parents or a parent, invariably at the end of the meeting, one of the parent has this particular look on their face, and I know what they're about to say or ask. And it goes something like this. Now, when my child starts to act up, it's okay. Your child can shriek, squirm, protest, whatever your child would like to do. I tell them, don't worry about how we clergy react to that. I said, truth be told, the congregation rather enjoys it. You all like to see clergy squirm and try to figure out how to react to young children. When I meet with the parents, we talk about the gowns and we talk about the morning and we talk about logistics and rehearsal. We do all that. But there is one question I leave them with. I said, this is sort of like when I do premarital counseling. I said, you are going to take a vow on Sunday morning. And so you sort of need to figure out the answer to this. You will hear this question in just a few moments. I said, all of baptism really for me comes down to this one question. Will you be responsible for seeing that the child you present is brought up in the Christian faith and life? It's sort of like going to a wedding when the clergy ask, will you take this person? You sort of need an answer, right? And that's what really this boils down to. Will you be responsible for seeing that the child you present is brought up in the Christian faith and life? Notice it doesn't ask you, will you be perfect? It doesn't ask, will you always agree with your child? Will you always agree with each other? Will you promise to go to church every Sunday? If only that were in the prayer book. It doesn't ask all of those questions. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It just asks you to do all in your power to raise your children in faith. And I always like to remind people, pay attention to the response. I will, with God's help. That important, very key part. I will, with God's help. We ask all kinds of questions this morning. You will be responsible for answering some of the questions as well. You're not let off the hook. We all do this. We all state something very clearly this morning. As Christian people, as Christian folk, we make some very bold declarations this morning. They're outlandish declarations if you compare it to the declarations made by the world. We have some very bold things to say this morning. One of the questions that is asked of all of you, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? Notice it doesn't say, do you always like other people? Notice it doesn't ask you, are you always going to agree with other people? It doesn't ask that. It asks simply, will you do all in your power to respect another person? It was a great joy to meet with both of these families on Wednesday night to talk about life ahead for Jacob and Ripley. It was a nice way to end Wednesday because Wednesday I went to lunch with two friends of mine, new friends of mine. And over lunch, a very delayed lunch because on the television screen behind us, CNN was replaying all the events from Paris of Wednesday morning. It caught our attention because the two gentlemen I was having lunch with are both named Muhammad. And so in this restaurant, two Muslims and a white dude wearing a collar stood out very clearly. And the longer we sat at the table and watched the scenes played out, Muhammad, two people from the Peace Islamic Center that meet here every Friday for their prayers, they began to very visibly grieve and express to me how difficult it is for them as Muslims who do all they can to strive for peace and justice and the dignity of every human being. It's difficult for them because they have a double whammy. Not only are they Muslims in this country, but for so many Americans and so many people who automatically conclude that the events playing out in Paris is what all Muslims would like to do. It's very difficult for them. That was played out again on Friday morning. I had a previously scheduled breakfast appointment with two of my friends who come from the Turkish Center of Islamic Studies in Fairfax. Some of you have met Bilal and Mahet when they came for Adult Forum a couple of months ago. These two imams explaining to me again how much they grieve for what some in this world do in the name of God and in the name of Islam. If you remember when Bilal was here to speak, he said something very clear. It's something he wrote this past week on their website, and he said, if those are Muslims doing this, then I'm not a Muslim. All that we do in the name of God can be sometimes horrendous. What we do in the name of God can be wonderful. We welcomed a number of strangers here this week for Hypothermia Prevention Week, welcoming them in the name of God. That is wonderful, and that is what we are called to do, to respect the dignity of every human being. At breakfast with Bilal and Mahet on Friday, I told them about our Hypothermia Prevention Week, and I said, I'm always reminded that story in the Hebrew Scriptures, that one day Abraham was sitting outside his tent and complete strangers appeared. And Abraham opened his tent to complete strangers. I said, that is sort of what we are doing this week at Hypothermia Week, opening our doors to complete strangers. And then Bilal, without missing the chance, smiled and he said, and Tim, remember too, Abraham, that is our common ancestor, Muslim, Jew, and Christian. We all claim Abraham. I spent more time this week listening to my Muslim friends than talking, because the truth is, as a white American male, I have incredible privilege. I have an incredible wide berth in this country. And so I'm reminded of that when I talk to those who don't. and I could only listen to them grieve. There was a time a few years ago that our government leaders declared that it is the American foreign policy to take down rogue leaders. And I thought, wow. Do you know how long that list is of rogue leaders all around this world? It's not just in one country. Neither are terrorist acts just confined to Paris. We should pray for people in Paris. We should respond to them as best we can. But let us also not forget that terror and violence strikes in places known as the Congo, Rwanda, Sudan, and many places around this world. Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? One way that I can easily respond to that question, I can't bring world peace. I can't solve all the issues of violence on our globe. But when I'm asked that question, what I know I can do in some small way is to go to breakfast and lunch with Muslims and become their friend. Invite them to come here to pray to God. We can open our doors to homeless. There are tangible, even small ways that we can all answer that question of, will you strive for justice and peace among all people? And will you respect the dignity of every human being? Again, it doesn't say you have to like other humans, but it does say our policy, the foreign policy of the church, and what we are about to do at baptism, that policy is to respect other human beings. To respect other human beings, Jew, Muslim, Christian, atheist, those who don't really care for the church or God at all. To respect the dignity of all human beings. In the name of God, amen.